Well, hello, New Point. It is so good to be with you today. My name is Dave VanDonge, and I'm the campus pastor here at Dover. And I want to welcome all of you joining at each one of our campuses. And even for those of you watching us online, we're so glad that you've joined in with us today. Now, before I get into our message today, I just want to give a real quick blurb about our small groups. Here at New Point, we really believe this. We believe that life change happens best in the context of community and our relationships with other people. And we believe the best environment for those relationships and that transformation does not actually happen best in larger environments like our weekend services. They happen best in our small groups. And today we are launching our small groups for this next semester. So if you are not currently involved in a group, today is a great opportunity for you to meet some of our small group leaders. So I encourage you, if you didn't get a chance before service, stop by and find a group that works for you after our service. Now, for those of you online, since you're not on one of our campuses, all you need to do is to go to our website, newpoint.org, and go to our groups page, and you can also find a small group there that works for you. Now, today we are in week number 2 of a series we've been in that we started last week. Dwight started last week, called Cultivate. Kind of at the heart of this message is that all of us, each one of us, has room for improvement in our lives. We all have room to grow. And we really also believe this at New Point. Dwight says this all the time. We believe that Jesus makes life better, and he makes us better at life. And we're basing this series off of this one verse from Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Here's what it says. It says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." What I love about this verse is it said, "And Jesus grew." I don't know if you realize this, but Jesus had room for growth in his life. I think sometimes as we think about room for growth, especially when it comes to our faith, we can often associate that with like, there is a sin in our life that we have to overcome. But growth is not necessarily always associated with sin. Sometimes there are just areas in our lives we need to improve and we need to get better. And that's why Jesus desires to make each one of us better at life. And in that verse, he highlights 4 areas where we have room to grow. We have room to grow in wisdom, which Dwight talked about last week. Stature, which we're going to talk about today. And then we will talk about growing in favor with God and man in the next 2 weeks. But today, where we really want to hone in on is this idea of stature, which really is speaking to our physical health. Now, in the church, I think we're really good at talking about our relational health, our emotional health, our spiritual health for sure, and even our mental health. I'm not always sure we do a great job talking about our physical health, but it is so important to talk about because all of these areas of our health are really interconnected. And this, for me, was actually an area I had to learn to grow, and I had to learn to be responsible with how I how I take care of myself physically. And I was reminded of this just a few years ago. A few years ago, my wife and my oldest daughter, Olivia, my wife's name is Rachel, they had pulled out some old photo albums. Now, just using the word photo albums probably tells you a little bit of how old these pictures actually are, because who uses photo albums anymore? But as they were looking through some of these photo albums, photos that were around 20 years old, they were looking at pictures of our family pictures. And as they were flipping through the pages, eventually my daughter Olivia turned to my wife and she said, "Mom," she's like, "who is that guy who's in all these photos with you and our family? Who is he?" And my wife kind of chuckled because it was me. My daughter just didn't recognize me because in my young adult years, I had a little bit of a chubby face. I know some of you probably don't believe me. Would you like to see some proof? Here's a couple examples of that phase of my life. Here's a couple of pictures. There's one, me with my wife, Rachel, and our niece, Brogan. Here's another picture with my brother-in-law, Bryce. I'm there on the right. And You know what's more criminal than how unhealthy I was in that season of life is what I was wearing. I have no idea what it is. Let's take that picture off there. But anyway, I think you get the point that I had a season of my life where I became very unhealthy. And here's what happened. All throughout my life, I was very active. I was in sports. I was outside all the time. But I also was not only healthy and how active I was, I also had a very healthy appetite. I ate a lot of food. The problem came after college. After college, my activity level went way down. I was a youth pastor in a church. So instead of being active throughout the day, I basically sat all day, every day. But as my activity level came down, my appetite didn't come down with it. It was still not a big thing for me to have 2 Chipotle-sized burritos every single day for lunch. And then I'd chase it down with an extra large Pepsi and a couple of churros for good measure, scratch that little bit of a sweet tooth thing. And not only would I eat that at lunch, I would eat just as much food or more at dinner. My appetite was crazy. Well, as you can imagine, with my activity level being so low and my calorie intake remaining so high, it didn't take long for me to start to put on some unhealthy weight. That all really came home or came to my realization when this happened about a year to a year and a half after I got out of college of kind of living this lifestyle. I had come back home for Christmas. Now, I had not seen my 3 brothers in probably at least a year. So this was the first time they were seeing me in a while, and especially looking like this. And all 3 of them, at different occasions, when they first saw me, they basically said, "Whoa, Dave, what did you do? What happened to you? And how many of Santa Claus's Christmas cookies did you eat?" At that moment, I realized I had a problem. And so I did something for the first time that I probably hadn't done since I had gotten my last sports physical. I decided to step on a scale. And when I stepped on a scale, I couldn't believe the number that I was seeing. When I graduated college a year and a half prior, I was 165. A year and a half later, I was 225. I had put on 60 pounds in just 12 to 18 months. I realized something had to change. Something in my life had to change. And so I began this journey of controlling what I consume so that it stopped controlling me. Because I realized this. If nothing was going to change, nothing was going to change. If nothing changes, then nothing changes. So I had to go about figuring out how I was going to make some lifestyle changes that was going to improve our physical health. Here's the other thing is I started to improve my physical health, and it didn't happen overnight. It took me years to get back to a place of where I was just a few months prior. It took me years to make that up. But once I did, I had no idea how bad I actually felt when I was unhealthy. I didn't know how bad I was feeling until I got healthy. And it was this incredible lesson for me that how we grow physically and what happens physically affects all other areas of our lives, which means our physical health is very much connected to our spiritual health, how we use our bodies, and what we put into our bodies, they matter. And they're not just physical choices. They really are spiritual choices. And that might cause many of you to pause and ask this question, like, really? Are our physical choices really spiritual choices? Well, they are, and here's why. Is I believe that many of us have this underlying belief, and there's different measures, right, of this belief that takes root in our lives. Many of us have this underlying belief that our bodies and our souls, our spirits, our souls and spirits, those are 2 completely separate and unconnected aspects of our lives. And depending on the level of this belief, we'll take it to certain extremes. But to the extreme of them not being connected at all, here's what we will fall into. Here's the lie that we will believe. Is that I can do whatever I want with my body. I can do to it, I can do with it, and what I put in it, it doesn't matter. I can do with my body what I want because it does not or will not affect my relationship with God. And I think we all know that that's not true, yet it's a lie that we can easily believe. And that belief is actually not something that's just a part of our society. This belief goes back a long, long time. In fact, when the Apostle Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians, the people of Corinth very much had this mindset that their body and their souls were complete separate. They did not connect, they were not interdependent, and one did not affect the other. And that's why the Apostle Paul wrote these words in 1 Corinthians 6. I'm going to read you verse 12 and then verse 19 and 20. The whole passage is great, but I think these verses do a great job of summarizing Paul's message to the Corinthians. This is what he says. He says, I have the right to do anything, you say. But not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. He goes on in verse 19, he says, do you not know that your bodies are physical bodies? Your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God. You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Honor God with your bodies. So what did Paul do here? What did he do in this passage? Well, he connected the body and the soul together. The physical is spiritual. Our physical choices are always spiritual choices. And I think here's why. He makes this connection is he wants us to realize this, is that taking ownership of our physical health gives us a great opportunity to grow the muscles of self-control. Taking control of our physical health gives us the opportunity to exercise our muscles of self-control. Is self-control, do any other verses or passages from Scripture come to mind when you hear the word self-control? I mean, there's one that instantly does for me. It's the fruit of the Spirit, right? In Galatians 5, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and what's the last one? Self-control. Having self-control in any area of your life and in every area of your life is a spiritual discipline. I actually loved how Paul kind of describes self-control in verse 12 of chapter 6 there, where he says that we should not be mastered by anything. We should not be mastered by anything. Do you ever have cravings? I remember specifically when my wife was pregnant, especially the first time she was pregnant, she had some very interesting cravings. I remember we were sitting at home one night. We had already eaten dinner, and I think we're sitting on the couch watching TV, and all of a sudden she says, I need Long John Silver's. And I looked at her, I gave her this look, I'm like, for the 8, 9, 10 years I've known you, I've never known once of you eating Long John Silver's, but she had this instant craving, we call her pregnancy craving of Long John Silver's. And so even though I started to question her about okay, do you really need some Long John Silver's right now? She gave me the look that our wives are really good at giving us a look at, guys, to know that I'd better get in the car and drive to Long John Silver's. So that's exactly what I did. I got her some hush puppies from Long John Silver's. And it was funny because every time she was pregnant 3 times. One time, and it was only one time in each pregnancy, she had this strong craving for hush puppies. I mean, sometimes cravings are like that. They're temporary. They come and they go. But there are other cravings that we have. And in fact, I imagine most of us, probably all of us, have a craving or 2 or 3 that are more than temporary. Cravings that could easily master us if we're not disciplined. In fact, the context of this passage in 1 Corinthians 6 was actually how our sexuality can master our bodies and master our minds. But Paul also in this passage talked about food. I think when we think of things also mastering us and having control of us, we think of addiction. And our minds typically go to things like drugs and alcohol. But I think that I think that there's another thing that can easily have mastery over us that we don't often talk about. And because we often don't associate it being as dangerous as something like drugs or alcohol. And that thing that can have mastery over so many of us is food. I mean, we don't talk about it a lot. And one, because it's more, I think, socially acceptable, but I also think because we don't often see the damaging effects of food having mastery over us in the same way that maybe something like drugs or alcohol would. But check out these statistics. I came across this scientific and medical research from Great Britain from just a few years ago. In this survey, and they surveyed and studied over 500,000 people. And if you don't know much about research, that is a very extensive research project. Like, this is some really good statistics. Here's what they found about physical health in their study: is that for people over 60 years old, for those of you who are over 60 years old, they found this, is that 55%, a little over half of all your medical conditions, things that require medical attention, and that could be anything pretty small or very significant thing, 55% of all medical conditions could be alleviated or eradicated by just taking care of yourself physically. Your activity levels, what you consume, and how you get rest. If you take care of yourselves in those three areas, 55% of medical conditions go away. Now, for those of you under 60, for all of the rest of the adult population, that percentage goes up to 70%. 70% of medical conditions would be alleviated if we took care of ourselves physically really well. That's some pretty strong statistics. And maybe, just maybe, the reason that God is interested in our physical health, our bodies, is because he just wants what's best for us. He wants us to be healthy because he knows when we're healthy, all other areas of our life improve, including those around us. Now, I do want to say this disclaimer before I move on. Those statistics also reveal this. That reveals, for those of you over 60, that means that 45% of medical conditions are outside of your control. And for those of you under 60, that means 30% of medical conditions are outside of your control. Like, there are some things we just can't control and that we have to deal with. And especially for those of you who have chronic illnesses, I want to say this to you. For those of you who have no remedy, it's no one's fault that you're struggling with disease or illness in the way that you are. I just want you to know that you are my hero. Some of the most inspiring people I know are those that wrestle with chronic illness, yet they remain positive and their faith is strong. And the way they love and serve others, even though they feel horrible, is inspirational. And just want to say to you again, if that's you, you're my heroes, and you inspire so many of us. Here's another disclaimer I want to make about our physical health, because this is a message that gets confused in our world. Our physical health is not, let me repeat that. Our physical health is not about how we look. That's not what it's about. That gets into vanity, which is a problem all on its own. Our physical health, it's about honoring God. It's about living well. It's about experiencing life to the full. And we also fully believe this, is that God's love for you does not change whether you lose 10 pounds or whether you gain 10 pounds. His love for us is constant. That's something we don't earn. His love stays the same. So Paul's summary, just to summarize this passage up again, Paul's summary in 1 Corinthians is basically this: honor God with your body. How do we do that? How do we honor God with the body? So what I want to do right now is just get into the practical side of this message. To thinking about how we honor God with our body, there's another fruit of the Spirit that comes to mind outside of self-control That other fruit that comes to mind for me is kindness. And I think this is an important word when it comes to our physical health, because our physical health is really just this. It's learning how to be kind to our bodies, giving our bodies what they need so they can thrive. So here are three ways that we honor God with our bodies. Let me give you these three right off the top. The three ways we honor God with our bodies are activity, with what we consume, and our rest. Let me hit on activity first. God, first and foremost, God created us to be active. It's only been in the last 150 years where our society as a whole has become less and less active. Society up until then was really active. God created us to be active. And science, all science and research is giving us some incredible clues as to why we need to be active, why we need exercise as part of our life. Our level of activity has an incredible opportunity to impact our mental health. Our level of activity can help things like depression, anxiety, ADHD. It can relieve stress. It can improve memory. Our activity levels can help us sleep better and just give us a general feeling of well-being. I mean, one just small example of that, like let's just take ADHD. ADHD is often treated with a couple of different prescriptions. Those prescriptions are a Ritalin and Adderall. What Ritalin and Adderall do is they help give those who struggle with AD the chemicals that their bodies need. Those chemicals are things like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. When we exercise, the more we exercise and are active in our lives, those are some of the natural chemicals that get released into our bodies. Now, that's not saying we still don't need prescriptions, because many of us do. But activity, being active, can help us overcome some of those challenges that we have in our life. And that's not only true with ADHD, that's also true in areas like depression and anxiety. Our activity levels have a great opportunity to improve our mental health. Just the basic, when it comes to activity or exercise, the basic baseline most experts agree to have is that we would have about 2.5 hours per week of active exercise where our heart rate would be elevated. And here's what they mean by that, is that the heart rate would be elevated enough, or not so much that you can't still talk. You should still be able to talk, but your heart rate should be high enough that you're not able to sing. Somewhere in that range between still being able to talk, even maybe taking a couple of deep breaths, versus not being able to sing, is where you want your heart rate to be able. So about 2.5 hours of that per week is the recommended amount of activity that we need. That is about 30 minutes of activity 5 days a week. Let me give you two other quick tips on exercise or activity. If you want to become more active in your life, one of the best things you could do is be active in a way you enjoy being active. Find an activity you enjoy. If it's playing basketball, that's an incredible activity. Or pickleball, or if you golf, maybe walk instead of ride. Find something that you love doing that will help you be motivated to stick with an active lifestyle. I also encourage you to make it social. The best way to get going and becoming more active is to have someone to do it with and someone who can keep you accountable. Now, when you get started, you may not be able to do 2.5 hours of activity every week. That's okay. Start with what you can do, and don't worry about what you can't do. Here's the good news. Here's the really good news, I think. When you start to become physically active, when you are consistent with that, it only takes 3 weeks to see meaningful improvement in your physical fitness. 3 weeks. That's it. And you will start to tell a noticeable difference in your physical fitness when you're consistent with that level of activity. Well, the second way we honor God with our bodies, or the second way we are kind to our bodies, is in what we consume. Now, when it comes to this, there are all kinds of great information out there about diet, not dieting, but our diets and how to have really healthy diets. So I'm not gonna go into that because that's easily available. Here's really where I wanna land on in this idea of what we consume. Have you ever found yourself saying this after a long day, after a stressful day? Man, I could really use a drink or a hit. Or for me, it's a Breyer's gallon of chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream, and who needs a bowl? Have you ever self in that spot before? Me too. I think we've all been there. Why do we do that? Where does that come from? What drives those cravings? Well, I believe the reason we do it is we do it in order to self-soothe or self-medicate. It's in this truth that I actually believe why God is most concerned with our physical health and what we put in to our bodies is because he wants to be the one who comforts, who provides, and who satisfies. And when we go to these other things, we are going to them to soothe ourselves rather than to the one who can ultimately comfort us the best. So what is it that you rely on to comfort you? Can I remind you of these words from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 9, where it says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. He cares for you in a way that no drink, drug, or food can. He loves you in a way that those things can't. My most recent way to try to continually be disciplined in this area of my life. This is an area that I continue to struggle with my relationship with food. But an area that I tried to continue to grow my discipline in this area was during our 21 days of prayer that concluded a couple of weeks ago. I made the decision that throughout the 21 days of prayer, I was going to reduce my diet to basically three things: fruit, vegetables, and nuts. Now, I did cheat a little bit with coffee because I love a little bit of creamer in my coffee. So maybe it could put a little bit of dairy in there as the fourth thing. But my diet for those 3 weeks, for 21 days, was fruit and vegetables and nuts. And I love carbs and meat. And so I really missed it. But what I experienced was actually very enlightening. You see, when I first started that diet the first week, the first, I would say 4, 5, maybe 6 days, physically, I felt horrible. But here's what I knew. Like, I knew this like in my head, but it wasn't what I was feeling. What I knew in my head is that my body was getting exactly what it needed. I was getting all the nutrition that I needed. I was getting all the nutrition I needed. In fact, I was getting nutrition that was better for me than what I normally give to my body. Yet, even though I was getting what was best for me, what I needed, my cravings persisted. I still had incredibly strong cravings. And as I was thinking about why these cravings were coming up, this really powerful truth hit me. And I don't think I would have come to know this truth, to experience this truth, had I not taken this step of that type of fasting during these 21 days. But I learned this truth. Just because you crave it doesn't mean you need it. Just because you crave it doesn't mean you deserve it. And just because you crave it doesn't mean it's what's best for you, no matter what our world would tell you about our cravings. And in this way, when we learn to say no to those cravings that we don't really need, that aren't really good for us, we are not only kind to our bodies, we're also kind to our souls. Which leads us into the third way we are kind to our bodies, and that's in rest. And it's in this area, actually, that I believe I have the most room for growth. I've learned over the years that I've learned some disciplines when I take care of like my activity and how I exercise and also my diet. But this is an area where I really still have an incredible amount of room for growth. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but consider this. Before Thomas Edison invented the light bulb in 1879, can you guess how much sleep the average adult got? 11 hours. Before the light bulb existed, we got 11 hours. I mean, we're nowhere close to those numbers today. And of these three areas, activity, exercise, and rest, rest is actually the one that God commands. It's in the 10 commandments when God says, honor the Sabbath. Honor the Sabbath. And why does God ask us or want us to honor the Sabbath? Well, there's a few reasons. First, the Sabbath is a day to shift from being restless to becoming restful. Sabbath literally means to stop, that we stop, what we're doing, that we stop working, we stop worrying, and we stop wanting. Sabbath, check this out. Sabbath is a resistance to accomplishment and accumulation. Anybody else struggle with those? Accomplishment and accumulation. Sabbath not only means to stop, it also means to delight. It's a day to both stop from our activity and preoccupations and delight in God, His grace, His blessings, His provision, and His pace. It's a continual acceptance from Jesus of this invitation that He gives us. And this is an invitation you all know really well. It's Matthew 11, 28 through 30, where Jesus says, come to me. Come. All you who are weary and burdened. Why are we weary and burdened? Accumulation and accomplishment. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, you guys all know that verse probably really well. Many of you probably heard this many times before. But as I was reading this passage this week, something caught my attention. It actually goes back to verse 25. I mean, do you sometimes wonder why Jesus says the things he does? I mean, there's so many details in the things he says that we often lose sight of because we weren't there when he said it, and we don't see everything that was happening. Here's kind of what set up, I believe, this passage. This is in Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. It says, at that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Now, why would Jesus talk about little children? Well, I believe that two little words gives us an insight of probably what was happening when Jesus made this invitation for us to come to him. I imagine that while Jesus was talking to his crowds who were soaking up his teaching, like had happened on many other occasions, there's probably a little boy or a little girl who kind of made their way through the crowd and made their way up to Jesus. And I'm sure they were looking up at Jesus. And as Jesus was talking, you know Jesus acknowledged this child, probably looked down at him or her and smiled, but continued talking to everybody else. And probably like many other occasions, the disciples probably tried to get the child and take him back to their parents, but Jesus stopped him. And as Jesus stopped them, he continued to talk. And I believe this could have happened. We don't know if this happened or not, but I'm just guessing something like this could have happened. Jesus might have gotten down on one knee. And as he continued to talk, he grabbed that little boy or that little girl, put them on their knee, continued teaching. And as he talked a little bit more and a little bit more, the child got more comfortable and more comfortable. And what I picture happening is this, is the child got so comfortable with Jesus that he or her eventually just rested their head on Jesus' chest while he was talking to the crowds. And as that child laid his head on Jesus' chest, it prompted Jesus to say those words we know so well. Come to me like this one. Come to me like this one. All you who are tired all you who are burdened, and I will give you rest. That is the invitation of Sabbath. That's the purpose of Sabbath, is that we would go to him to find our rest. And when it comes to our physical health, we desperately need more rest. I know how busy you are. I'm busy too. But it is how we take care of ourselves physically that affects all other areas of our life. We take care of ourselves with our activity, what we consume, and how we rest. And so my challenge for you today is I know for it's way too much to try to address all three of these areas at the same time. So I just want to ask you, pick one. My challenge is you, what one of these areas, activity, what you consume, or what you rest, which one of those are most important for you to address in this season of your life? And I would encourage you to try some type of a fast where you take something out of your life for a period of time, not forever, and just see the lessons that God teaches you to exercise those muscles of self-control. I imagine for many of you, probably the area you need to tackle is actually this area of rest. You have let this commandment, this value of Sabbath slip in your life where you haven't stopped wanting, you haven't stopped working, and you haven't stopped worrying. And you haven't taken the time to really delight in God. God asks us to give a day, one day a week, to just those activities. What is it for you? Let me pray for you as you set out on that journey. Father God, I'm so grateful for your word and that your word speaks to all areas of our life. God, we're all guilty of compartmentalizing our life into these different areas, to our mental health, to our emotional health, to our relational health, and our physical health. And God, what we are reminded of today is that it is all connected. One affects the other. So God, I thank you for the gift of our bodies that you've given to us. God, may we steward how we take care of them, how we are kind to our bodies very, very well. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.